Hello, hello, hello. You get fairy dust and I get fairy dust and our projects get fairy dust. And since we're knitting, you get glitter stitches and I get glitter stitches and our projects get glitter stitches. I'm the knitting fairy godmother. I'm so glad you could join us today. So go get your project so that you can knit along while we talk about how to pick a new project. While you're getting your new project, let me invite you to sign up for my newsletter. Every week I send you insights and tips, things that I've been thinking about and working on, and you can do that on my website, knittingfairygodmother.com. You can sign up for the newsletter there. So we would love to have you join us. All right, so the question today, I've seen a lot of buzzing and questions around how to pick a new knitting project. And I like to use the one-step rule. So one of my favorite things about knitting is that everything that we do in knitting has to do with the 4 fundamentals. The 4 fundamentals are casting on, the knit stitch, the purl stitch, and binding off. So every single thing that we do in knitting has to do with those 4 fundamental skills. So if we operate from the idea of a pyramid, right, a hierarchy pyramid, we have the 4 fundamental skills at the bottom. And then everything that we do builds on the foundation of the 4 fundamental skills. That's one way to think about knitting. The other way to think about knitting is a little bit more like a spider web or a thought cloud, where we have the 4 fundamental skills at the center. And then you can decide to go off and learn how to do lace. And then there's a whole hierarchy behind learning lace. And there's other things that you can do from the 4 fundamentals, like cables. So then there's a whole part of the cable path. And everything starts in the middle with the 4 fundamentals, but it all builds off of those 4 skills. So once you know the 4 skills, you can basically do anything you want, which is what I love about knitting. But sometimes it can be difficult to decide what to do next. Maybe you've knit your first project, maybe you've got 3 projects under your belt, but now you want to try something to build your skills, to incorporate new things, or maybe you have an aspirational project. I was talking with someone recently who wanted to make socks, and she didn't want to make just plain socks. She wanted to make very complex Fair Isle socks, garments that you can wear. And so there's a lot going on with that idea. And that's an aspirational project, right? Because there's many different skills happening at the same time. And so then we go down to the foundation, the base. And if you look at a project and you think, what are the skills that I need to know? We can assume right off the bat that every knitting project will have the 4 fundamentals. But then you can look at things like gauge. What is the size of the yarn being used? Because worsted weight is a good mid-range average. But if you go down to a fingering weight, then the needles and the yarn become very small. And there is a skill set involved with using small yarn and small needles. So practice that, right? Practice and repetition are the best teachers. Pick a simple project in using skills that you already know, knit, purl, with small yarn and needles. And then you're learning how to use the small yarn and needles. That's the only variable that's changing on a new project. And then you've built up the skills. Then if you like knitting with small yarn and needles, then you can build on the complexity there. And maybe you make a garment as your next project. But you might discover that you really don't like to use small yarn and needles. So it's a good place to discover what you like and what you think is best suited for you. So maybe if you start with worsted weight yarn, knit purl projects, then the next thing you want to do is try a chunky hat, which goes up in yarn size. And because it's a hat, now we're working in the round. So those are two new skills. We're building on our knit, purl, back and forth flat knitting skills. We're changing the size of the yarn to bigger. Chunky size is bigger than worsted weight. And we're adding on knitting in the round instead of knitting flat. So those are new skills. If we go back to the one-step rule or the one-step guideline, we're trying to only change one thing on the new project. So that could be yarn size, that could be stitches used. If you know how to do a knit two together, maybe you find a project with an SSK, which is a different type of decrease, and then you're adding to your knitting toolbox in the decreases. All of the types of projects. So there's lace projects, cable projects, scarf projects, cowl projects. There's combining knits and purls. So that's like your ribbing, your texture stitches. There's lots of different ways that you can experiment with these ideas in the one-step way, because we're trying to avoid frustration, right? That's the ultimate goal. We want everything to be easily understood, a little bit enjoyable, and adding on our skills. So the one-step rule is the easiest way to do that. Take the skills that you know, the skills that you want to learn, change one variable to learn one new skill, and then everything else is the same. So that is Ask a Knitting Fairy Godmother for this week. If you have questions, leave me a question in the comments below or send it to me on direct message and I will answer your question next week. Keep knitting, everyone. Talk to you later.